The cattle market has changed, and as we've seen these record high prices, that also makes replacement females pretty expensive. And we also see the smallest U.S. cow herd in decades. So does that mean it's time to change the way we make culling decisions? Well, this week, Dr. Ron Gill from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension joins me as we sort through which culling principles should never change and where today's market may justify looking at a cow differently.
We can't throw out the normal culling criteria just because the market's good. This mentality of, well, let's keep her one more year, that may actually wind up costing you money.
Then we'll put those principles to the test in a lightning round of real-world cow scenarios. For example, 9-year-old cows, open 3-year-olds. How about a dangerous cow? Oversized cows, late calvers. What stays, what goes, and why?
The middle frame size cows are probably the ones that are most efficient in a commercial cow operation. So, in my opinion, now's a great time to get your cow herd more uniform in size and shape.
Today's market may change how you evaluate individual cows, but should it change the principles behind your decision? That's coming up on today's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, do you load the old girl up and head to town, or do you keep her for one more year? Hi, everyone. Justin Mills here, host of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We thank you for joining us, and as you heard there in the opening, Dr. Ron Gill will be joining us on our program today as we have that discussion about whether or not that cow has earned a spot in the herd for yet another year. A lot of variables and factors come into that discussion as we think about culling and keeping ahead of the fall season and knowing that we're going to be having to do that. A lot of different scenarios that come into that as well. So that discussion we'll be having with Dr. Gill on that, I think, will be applicable to pretty much anybody that runs a cow anywhere across the country. Also joining us later on in the show, meteorologist Don Day will be in as he'll explain why this El Niño may not behave the way many expect and why today's weather pattern may actually have more in common with the 1950s than what we saw in the famous El Niño of 1997. But so be sure to join us for that later on in the show. Hey, did you know we are coming up on 20 years of when the Working Ranch magazine first was published, and with that there's going to be a lot of great editions that are going to be coming out to celebrate that. And if you want to be on that subscription list and are not a current subscriber to Working Ranch magazine, you can easily do that by going to workingranchmag.com and start your subscription here today. Or of course, another way you can do that is stop by your local Tractor Supply store, and you can pick one there up off the shelf. And a shout out to the store in Paris, Tennessee. And when I hear that name, Paris, Tennessee, I think Tracy Lawrence sang a song about Paris, Tennessee. Also, a shout out to the Tractor Supply store in Payson, Arizona, in Petaluma, California, and in Phoenix City, Alabama. Hey, be sure to join us on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We're going to be tackling one of the biggest long-term questions in the commercial cow business. And it kind of coincides a little bit with today's discussion, but how do you build a commercial cow that's profitable for the long haul? Joining me will be Trey Patterson of the Padlock Ranch and John Maddox of Maddox Cattle Company for what I promise you folks is going to be a very fascinating conversation. So be sure to tune in on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hey, by the way, I might mention too that if you do have to step away from the radio for unforeseen reason, you can of course catch all of our shows by going to our site at workingranchradio.com or any preferred podcast provider that you might have. Another place you can also catch that is at agroamerica.com. Not only do they carry our show, but they carry a lot of other ag-related podcasts as well. So you can catch them on a variety of places. You can catch our show. And also, be sure to leave a ratings or a review. That's helpful for not only for us, for other folks listening. I might point you to go back and listen to last week's show as well. Tony Pippa with the Brookings Institute joined us as we talked about data centers. Now, I know this is a controversial topic, and we weren't really jumping into the controversy as much as just kind of getting caught up to speed, but it was the title of last week's show was Data Centers, What Rural America Needs to Know. So I encourage you to go back and listen to last week's show. Well, let's jump into our subject at hand here today, and join Joining us on our program today is Dr. Ron Gill. He's a professor, and he's also an extension livestock specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And Dr. Gill, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, we're at a time of the year where a lot of us are thinking cull cows. How do we manage that? And for some folks in the country, it's drought. Other areas, maybe you've seen a little bit more moisture, not really looking from that perspective. But nevertheless, each and every year, any ranch operation is going to be looking at, managing your culls, looking at how do we go about doing that. And I think simply the point of this is not necessarily looking at cull cows, is answering this question. Should this cow earn another year in our herd? And not simply because she's pregnant, but why? What are some of the other factors, and really looking from a long-term perspective? So with that in mind, before we even get started in talking about any culling, in your opinion, what does a commercial cow have to do to earn another year?
Well, I think the have to, if I was to say one, would be have a pregnancy that you're going to get a calf out of. That's probably anywhere 5 to 10 times more important than any production trait we can look at. So reproductive performance is key. Now, with that said, with the cost of some of the replacement cattle out there, we may have to change some of our thinking on that, because is it cheaper to keep a cow that may not have conceived for whatever reason? If we think she'll be a productive cow in the future, do we keep her? And so I do think that's kind of changed in this market signals with the cost of replacements, even retaining your own heifers. It's a pretty expensive process right now. So historically, they don't have a pregnancy, they're gone. Mm-hmm. I've kind of rethought that in the last couple of years because of these markets. So I don't think it's as cut and dried as it is in a regular production cycle.
Yeah. Well, I know before you and I started, we're talking about just from a principle standpoint, a cow, certain things that she needs to hit and match in order for us to keep that cow yet another year. And like you said, and we talked about this before we started here today, with the cattle numbers where they're at, with the prices where they're at, sure has kind of basically taken that all like a bunch of Yahtzee dice, throwing them in the cup, and we're back out on the table. And we have to look at that a little bit differently. But with that in mind, even though we look at that differently, there's still some other aspects that we look from a profitability standpoint as well that have to be included in our decision-making process.
I'd agree with that. There's quite a few things you really got to consider, whether her age or her structure or udder or whatever it might be. Will it last another year? Not just because she's pregnant. So we can't throw out the normal culling criteria just because the market's good. This mentality of, well, let's keep her one more year, that may actually wind up costing you money, because you'll have a cow there that may still not wean a calf, but you've invested additional dollars or not replaced her with a productive female into the herd. So one thing I see that can also get us in trouble is just dropping our normal culling procedures. I think once we make those keep cull decisions, then we can go back in and say, well, is there an excuse for this cow, or is this group of cows, or whatever it might be? But I don't think we can afford to abandon any kind of structural issues. If they've got lameness, over the years I've tried to keep a cow that was a little bit lame. Well, they always wind up being a problem. Either you can't move them like you need to, they won't make it to market at the end, and they'd lose weight and condition and therefore value. So udders and feet and legs, I don't think we can give much excuse for that in commercial production, but maybe there are some other things, body condition, that's a result of our mismanagement or drought or something like that. Then I think we have a little wiggle room, but structure, that kind of stuff, I think we need to stick with our normal culling procedures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Dr. Gill, I think about, and I want to come back to some of those here in our next segment a bit, and we will, as far as specifically some of those things to evaluate. One of the things I think about too is, for some folks, maybe you're at the top end of, you've stocked up to where you need to be and you've got some replacement cattle coming in potentially. That's another aspect when you're looking at keep cull in your herd, knowing that you've got some young cattle coming in to replace those. That's another thing that's going to really sway how deep you're going to cull too.
Yeah, you've invested enough money to get some young cattle up to production level in this market. You've got a pretty good investment in them. And so either got to sell them at a high value and keep some older cows and slow down your ability to rebuild an age group. So that's another thing. I don't think we can really afford to get out of our norm in replacement percentages just because it can throw off actually cash flow for one, or selling two calf crops or not selling a calf crop. So I think we have to be diligent in maintaining that base program that we've come up with. But then I think we have some room to tweak it based on whether it's a drought and we need to cull deeper or whatever. One of the things I get people thinking about, the least productive cow in a drought is going to be those young cows. And so do we take a chance on not having them rebreed? So then we got another calf crop we're not going to be able to get full value for. So that's kind of controversial when you go telling somebody to sell their young replacement stock. But if you're looking at trying to have a calf to sell out of every cow over these next 2 or 3 years in this good market, maybe you need to think about that or find another place for those cows to go, maybe even a lease operation or something else to either take the young ones or take some of the older cows and spread your risk a little bit in that scenario.
Yeah. Dr. Gill, what do you think are some traits that are overvalued and traits that are undervalued when these guys are evaluating, you're looking at your cattle? Just the traits that are overvalued and the traits that are undervalued.
Oh, that overvalued, that's an interesting one. A lot of times I think we overvalue the genetic merit of cows. Just because you'll produce a high marbling calf, it doesn't mean if the weight's not there and all these other things that are necessary. And one, having a live calf every year, that's the biggest factor. So I do think we can overvalue that a little bit, maybe keep some cows that are not quite at the top as far as pounds weaned and that kind of stuff. May not cycle and rebreed in a timely fashion. I think, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but we get hung up on color sometimes. I realize there is value to that, but are we sacrificing some good cows because they're not the right color? I think we can fix a lot of what the calf is by what we breed them to. And so we see a lot of people getting so hung up on the color of a cow when in fact what we're trying to worry about is the color of the calf we're marketing. And so I think that's another one that just pops to mind. I think undervalued, sometimes I think disposition kind of falls into that. We'll tolerate some cows because they are productive, but they are very disruptive to gathers or dangerous when you get them in the pen. And I think that's where I might draw the line on those cows. I don't mind one that's a little flighty as long as they don't disrupt everything and they're not dangerous. And so safety becomes that key. If they're a danger to anybody on the operation, then they need to go. I don't mind one that's got a little shorter fuse or that gets a little stirred up every once in a while, as long as they are manageable, I guess is the way to look at it. Some other things that I think we don't pay enough attention to sometimes in the beef cow side of it is udder quality, teat size and quality and structure. These old cows that get mastitis or have a quarter or two that a calf has trouble nursing when they're first born, all of those things need to be paid attention to. But I'm kind of a nut on udder quality and structure just because I'm not milking a cow out. I see people that will get cows up and milk them down to where the calf can get a hold of a teat, and I don't have the opportunity to do that nor the desire to do that. So I've got to do that from a management standpoint. And the other one I see now is feet and leg. We've got a lot of cattle with bad feet on them. And I think we've made some excuses from a genetic standpoint for that. But if you've had many of these cattle that go to falling out of your herd, once you stuck all this money in them for 3 or 4 years, the feet gets to be a bigger and bigger deal. So that's one I think we've got to pay attention to, or it's going to plague the industry for the next 15 or 20 years if we don't work those genetics out.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Gill, let's take a break. You've already done a good job of segueing into, I think, our next segment and looking beyond the pregnancy, looking at some of those things, not really moving away from some of our initial Cull principles that we've had, but some things we start to look at beyond that. You've hit on a few of those. I want to continue that conversation when we come back, okay?
All right.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
All right, Ron, you've already done a good job of identifying some of these things. You were talking feet and legs, how important that is, and the udder in that. And I think that's one of the things that as we look beyond just, okay, a cow's pregnant, so we're just going to keep her another year. But in order for us to keep her another year, we're having to subsidize her, whether it's physical labor, maybe it's feed, various different things. We're having to subsidize her to make her work. And if you're an outfit that you don't mind doing that, that's fine. But for majority of ranching operations, you kind of need a cow that's going to take care of herself, take care of her baby, and really be as maintenance-free as possible in order to be as profitable as we can in a ranching operation. So beyond the pregnancy aspect, you've already hit those things. Body condition, temperament, mothering ability. That's something that we haven't always talked about. I know it's a ways down on the list, but that's something to keep in mind as well.
Well, if it's very far down your list, I think you need to move it up. that cow's job is to raise that calf. And we have gotten some genetics now that if the calf gets up and follow them, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's fine. And that's unacceptable from a cow standpoint. So we need that mothering ability in there. In some environments, it's much more critical than it is others, but you've got to have one that will handle them in all types of weather conditions, predator conditions, and the fact that they'll just take them with them. I've seen so many cows that'll walk off and leave a calf, and that cannot happen. That's just a big expense and something that can certainly be avoided. So that's something to evaluate. If you're having to pair cows up and mother cows up with their calf, that's, in my opinion, just totally unacceptable. So that'd be one thing that I'd cull a cow for almost immediately if she is that kind of cow. You mentioned body condition and environment. Sometimes I think we all try to think all the cows ought to be the same. I think there's a room for a lot of different types of cows. I go by a philosophy that if I can set my nutritional parameters by, I'm going to make sure they have adequate forage. I'm going to supplement a certain level. And then cows that will fit within that production system and maintain body condition and maintain reproductive performance, that's great. But if they fall out because they're not adapted to my management and my environment, that's how I think you build an environmentally and a ranch adapted cow. There's some people, like you said earlier, that can feed enough to compensate for some of these higher energy requirement cows. That may work in this market, but if the market's pretty limited and you go to spending that much on feed, which is probably our second, maybe even third highest expense, then yeah, we've got problems. So I think that's where you kind of set the parameters by which you're going to manage, whether it's being feed and harvested forages, grazable forage, standing forage, whatever it is. But you know how you're going to manage, what cows can fit within that environment, and that's management strategy. So that's something I think that we just kind of have to set a baseline. There are going to be years when you have to go above and beyond on supplementation or feeding just to maintain the cow herd, or I think you should. This market is one of those scenarios. We can afford to put a little more inputs into these cows when the calves are bringing this much. But in reality, you don't want to get in the habit of always having to do that, because then you eat up what this excess profit we keep talking about. I saw some numbers yesterday that were talking about $1,100-$1,200 a cow cost. If we're creeping up that high because of supplemental feeding and additional inputs, we may need to rethink that too. When this market turns the other way, that's going to be a hard one to fix if we've adapted that much. So anyway, every operation I think has to go through that evaluation and budgeting to kind of see what they can afford to pay. As we've said already, right now is a time when we can afford to put a few more inputs into them to maintain that level of productivity, particularly in drought, or particularly if we think it's a short-term drought situation, we can just get them through to the other side. I think you can afford to feed some cows that you historically might not have. So
yeah,
that's something to always have to think about and evaluate.
Yeah. And I think too, that's definitely like you had said, you don't want to get in the habit of it because that's going to be a hard habit to break, whether it's you physically or even your cows. Then you have a bunch of cows that have to be subsidized in order to get through the year. So that's something to think about. I think ultimately, and maybe we should have even hit this at the very beginning, I think one of the things that we're addressing underlying in some of this is we want cows with longevity. We want cows that are going to stay in that herd because we well know, what is it, like 3.5 to almost 4 calves to pay for a cow if you're going to keep that cow before she actually starts really turning you a profit. And so with that in mind, that's the stuff we're looking at. When you start talking about feet and legs and udder and body condition, temperament, mothering ability, that all plays into the very bottom line of longevity. And that's the basis that I think is, as I've always said, and we've had shows here on there, is one of the biggest profit takers from our ranching operations is that we don't have longevity in our cattle herd.
I completely agree with that. And I think one of the criteria you can use, for example, in the Red Angus breed, they have the stayability EPD. And that's basically an index of whether or not they've got decent enough udders, feet, legs, and reproductive performance that they'll stay in a herd a long time. So whether we use an EPD or we have knowledge and data to back our own cows up, I think we have genetic lines that have better stability or longevity in a herd, and those are the ones we need to select from. And that's normally why we always recommend, if you're retaining heifers, to select heifers from those cows that calve in the first cycle or two of the calving season. Mm-hmm. So if their mothers can do that genetically, and probably they can do it themselves. So that's the reason everybody recommends that. And then when you're purchasing heifers, you may not know how they fit into that scenario. You may be purchasing cattle that don't have that longevity and stayability in your herd. I think you can compensate from that a little bit by your source and learning who that replacement female supplier is. If you're consistent in that, then I think you can alleviate a lot of those problems too. So that's always a risk though in buying replacements. Historically, I think we have a lot higher culling rate on purchased cattle than we do on raised cattle. Mm-hmm. And every time I see an economist do the math, they treat them as if they've got the same culling rates. And my experience is not that. So yeah, I think that's something we really have to use a sharp pencil on and be realistic on what those retention rates, longevity of those purchased cattle might be. So that's one of those budgeting things. You just got to be realistic, and everybody's always over optimistic in the cattle business.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Dr. Gill, we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, I'm going to run you through kind of some different scenarios and get your take on it, because I think the things we're trying to answer in this is, how do I identify which cows have stayed too long? Maybe they've been on here a year too long. How many cows or what type of cows are we giving too many chances to? And then are there a set of cows that we're selling maybe too early? And I want to ask you some kind of lightning round questions that we can identify and maybe answer some of those questions when we come back, all right?
A high-functioning rumen drives herd performance, gut health, and profitability. Levucel SC by Lala Man Animal Nutrition is the only natural-occurring rumen-specific active dry yeast probiotic selected to optimize rumen function, boost fiber digestion, and help you get more out of your forage and feed. No matter how you supplement your herd, including Levucel SC can help your cows do more on what they already have. Discover the right formulation for your herd at chooselevucelsc.com.
Dr. Ron Gill, professor and extension livestock specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, is joining me here today on the program as we are talking about, does every cow automatically earn another year in your herd just simply because she comes in pregnant, or are there some other things that we evaluate? We've talked a lot of different things already. And Dr. Gill, I want to get into a lightning round here with you, just give you some scenarios to look at. Are we going to run these cows another year? And I want you to tell me keep, sell, or why after each one of these different scenarios that I give you, okay? All right, so here's the first one. She's a 9-year-old cow. She raises one of your biggest calves, but her teeth are beginning to wear down. Keep, sell, and why?
I would probably keep that cow now because she still has some teeth. I'd identify her to evaluate every year after this to see whether she stays. But as long as she's still milking enough to raise that big calf, has some teeth, I'd probably keep her, particularly in this market.
You bet. All right, next one. She's a 3-year-old cow. She came in open, but she's got the best genetics or some of the top-end genetics in your herd. Keep, sell, and why?
Oh, that's one of them depend answers there.
Well, I'm going to go back to your very first answer was, where are they coming in pregnant? But I'm kind of bouncing that back at you here a little bit.
Well, here's why I say it depends right now. Because you're going to have to replace her with something. Will it be cheaper to keep her around or to develop a heifer for 2 years? So that's one of those things that I think you have to make that call and then decide, why is she open? Because what I said a while ago about you've set this criteria that you're going to manage, provide adequate forage, adequate supplementation, and then if they don't fit within that system, you probably ought to sell them. But if you had a drought or you didn't get enough supplement in them or something else that it was your fault and not the cow's fault, then I'd probably keep her around or at least identify her, give her another chance. I don't ever give them 2 chances. We always identify those cows some way, and if they come up open again, they're certainly gone.
Okay. All right. Here's another example. She has an outstanding calf every year. She's been consistent with that, but she's dangerous and she's got a terrible disposition.
If she's dangerous, I'd cull her. There's nothing more expensive than somebody getting hurt. And so if she's dangerous to people, horses, whatever it might be, then I think you need to cull one of them.
Okay. All right. Now you got a 7-year-old cow. She raises pretty much average calves every year. Nothing that sticks out, nothing that catches your eye as far as bad or good. Never misses, always breeds early, stays fleshy, stays good. Keep, sell.
I'm keeping her. I think if she were in the lower end of the production of calves, weaning weight, that kind of thing, maybe, but if she's in the middle, you need some middle cows so to make out a herd. So she gets to stay.
Okay. All right. The next scenario is this. She's a large, mature cow, like we're talking way above even industry average, large, mature cow. She's an excellent producer, but she needs a lot of feed every winter to maintain that.
If I'm having to manage her separately or differently than this criteria I talked about earlier, I have to feed her more, sort them kind of cows off and feed them and manage them differently, I'm going to get rid of them. I think long term, be beneficial to get rid of those cows and get something that'll fit within your management scenario.
Mm-hmm. Just a side note off of that discussion, because I think we can have a sidebar discussion about, you had talked earlier about that 7-year-old cow that raises an average calf, of whether we're keeping replacement heifers of those large ones and those small ones. Is that the ones we're keeping, or do we need to be keeping these moderate, middle-sized cattle? And I think that question that we talked about before, and even this large, mature cow, even when we're looking at culling cows that already have been established in our herd, do we look at that same criteria a little bit as maybe getting rid of the highs and the lows a little bit so we have some consistency? If you're selling a potload of cows, it's sure pretty nice to have a potload of calves that look like peas in a pod.
I firmly believe, and I do that myself, if one of them gets way too big a frame on them and their calves don't look like the rest of them, they are a candidate. One, the cull value on those cows is extremely high right now, just from a packer standpoint. So now's a great time to shape your herd up, because the small cows on one end are still really valuable. Big cows are worth a lot of money. And the middle frame size cows are probably the ones that are most efficient in a commercial cow operation. So in my opinion, now's a great time to get your cow herd more uniform in size and shape, particularly if you're trying to cull and maintain numbers at a certain level.
Yeah.
If you've been low in numbers because of drought or something else, maybe you don't right now. But
Yeah.
I think that's a scenario you have to make a call on long term, what's it going to look like. But if you're at adequate numbers, then yeah, I'd probably peel the ends off.
Yeah. And then that's a good point. Like you said, if you're needing to add cattle, you might keep some of this stuff that we're talking about. But if you're maintaining, then you're really going to look at some of this. So, okay, here's another scenario. A first calf heifer, light calf, good mother. She bred back first cycle as a coming 3.
Her biggest problem you're saying is her light calf?
Yes.
Okay. If it's because of udder structure, genetics, if you think it's genetics, then I'd probably cull the cow. If it's mastitis, just lack of milk production. I have seen some young cows, though, that don't do very good on their first calf, but the second calf is pretty good as far as milk production, and they wind up being those middle cows. So, one, if you have some of that knowledge and she has rebred, she did bring you a coupon this year, maybe try her again. But I think there's some things you really have to look at and consider when you make that decision, not just because she raised, if it's a real dink, then
Yeah.
maybe. But if it's nothing really wrong with it, just small, maybe give her another chance, particularly in this environment.
Yeah. That reminds me, as I just having discussions in our ranching operation, for several years on our first calf heifers, we'd pretty much breed most of the heifer calves. Now, we'd pull some out and kick them out and wouldn't breed everything, but we'd expose everything to bull. Then everything that was third and fourth termed, pregged up, we'd go ahead and sell and keep the first and second termers. Last year, however, we didn't. We pretty much kept everything, calved everything out. And the mindset behind that was of looking at maybe that 3-year-old. How does she bounce back as a 3-year-old? Because that's going to be maybe more valuable from a longevity standpoint than how she looks after that first calf or how that calf looks off of a first calf heifer. Kind of jives with a little bit with this conversation, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And like I said, there's a lot of reasons that calf may come in under what you'd expect it to be. And then a lot of times we really take care of the heifers. We may not take care of that second calf cow at the same level. And so when your comment there, what does she come back in looking like in her second calf and lactation and rebreeding? So if you can afford to keep some of them around like that, I sure think it's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, last question here. She's a late calver and she's done it every year, been a late calver.
I probably in years past would have kept those cows, but my old age has no tolerance for that anymore. We have a 90-day breeding season, and there's very few calves born in that last 30 days. Why we don't just cut it off and shorten that up, make our calf crop more uniform? It decreases the amount of time you got to wait to get branding done and everything else. So most of it could shorten that up and get rid of those late calving cows, particularly if they're historically going to do that. And sometimes that's set up by how late they are in the calving season in their first year. Just like you said, you kept all those heifers that one year. It's very difficult to back them up, but it's real easy for them to stay at the end of the calving season.
All right, so that's kind of the end of our short round. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll finish up our conversation, all right? Agrocarbon works with farmers and ranchers to implement practices that promote soil health and add a new revenue stream. Now, when you work with Agrocarbon, you'll gain a partner that provides flexible payments and local agronomic expertise for your row crop or your range or even your pasture operations. Partnering with Agrocarbon is an investment in your land and your ranch's future. Get started today at agrocarbon.com.
Your herd needs protein. When the seasons shift, so do your herd's protein needs. SmartLick protein tubs deliver consistent nutrition that drives performance, helping cattle make the most of available forages, maintain condition and power through winter efficiently, giving you peace of mind. Feed smarter, not harder. Go to smartlick.com. That's smartlic.com to find your dealer.
All right, so as we went through our lightning round the last time, and it was throwing out different scenarios of cows, I think one of the things, and I want to just reiterate again, this does not negate the fact, because a lot of those scenarios did not specifically talk about the things you addressed right off the bat when we discussed, and that was feet and legs, udder. It does not negate those. So when those things are going south on you, or you know they're going to go south on that cow, first and foremost, that's one of our key things, and we're just kind of reiterating what you already said in the first segment.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real reason to keep a cow around that may have bad feet or that may be getting lame a little bit. That's just asking for trouble. If they're hurting, they're not going to milk as much. The calf's going to be smaller, and then your cull value is going to be so much less on those thin cows. So pulling the trigger early on particularly feet and leg issues is critical. If you've got udder issues from mastitis or something like that, I think that's another one that'll take some condition off those cows and produce a lighter weight calf.
Mm-hmm. So as we kind of wrap up our particular conversation, and I know we've addressed the fact that some of the things and some of the mindset that we look at today would have been different than they would have been 5, 7, 10 years ago. And some of that, a lot of it has to do with where the markets are at, where we see our U.S. cattle herd numbers, and knowing that it could bring some support to this market for longer than just a 1-year spike and then back down. We don't know that, but I mean, you have to have some mind and thinking that way. But as we recap on all of this, just some final comments as far as some principles, and we've already reiterated some of that, but just really should never change.
Always have your base and standardized kind of program. And then I think you can make decisions on individuals within that. But if you're historically culling cows at 10 years of age or whatever, maybe you reevaluate that. Like in your scenario, that 9-year-old cow, good teeth, can't afford to keep her. The underlying question is, do you have enough forage and resources to do that? And if you don't, then you don't want to start feeding them and get sloppy in your management, is what I'd call it, where you're actually spending more money on these cows than you should, as we've mentioned earlier. So you have to keep your plans for replacement females, whether it's retaining heifers or purchasing from a consistent source, keep that in place best you can. And I know some of us can't get the heifers we want because we don't have the resources right now for drought or whatever it might be. But as best you can, keep that source and that opportunity available to you, and then stick to your culling criteria. Where I see people get in trouble when they get really far off their norm in these high markets, then that can kind of come back and bite you. So we can tweak it on the ends a little bit, but I think we have to really stay with the core principles that got you to this point.
Mm-hmm. You talked about some of them old cows, and one of the questions I mentioned earlier as we were coming out of segment 2 is there a set of cows we could be selling too early?
Yeah, there's always some you could. In a drought situation, the most productive cows are those older cows. They'll rebreed. They may not have the heaviest weaning weight, but they're through growing. They're lactating all they're going to. By the time they make it to 10 or 12 years old in somebody's operation, they're pretty environmentally adapted. They haven't had many problems structurally or anything else. So I may push the envelope a little bit more on the older cows than some should. And I'm not going to recommend everybody do that, but sure, look at those cows. But also realize that if you start keeping them, you're going to wind up with a slug of cows you've got to cull at some point in time. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm kind of mining those old cows so I'll have more calves to sell. But I also know that I've got to get my strategies right to get rid of them and still have a good core base cow herd when it's all said and done. So I'm still retaining about the same amount of heifers, but I'm just keeping some of the older one more year if I have the forage to do that.
Yeah. I've got a couple final questions, but the final question in regard to our conversation here today, and that is this. As folks going into this time of the year and looking at, is she going to stay another year? Is she not going to stay another year? She's pregnant. Is she going to stay? Is she not going to stay? And of course, there's so many variables. We do know that. But what's one thing you want guys to rethink about as they head into this fall and looking at this cow? She's coming down the chute. And what's the one thing that we want that you'd like to leave them with that they need to be thinking about?
I think we need to decide whether she is the type of cow you want to raise. We talked about the big cows, the little cows, off-colored cows, whatever it might be. If there's an opportunity to shape this cow herd up even better for yourself, then make those decisions now. Don't do something you'll regret later kind of scenario. I think would be my thought. Just make sure you're sticking with your program, identifying the type of cows and trying to get uniformity of production, your environmental adaptability, all that as close to right as you can.
Yep. Good advice there. Very good. All right. Here is the final question, and it has nothing to do with our conversation here today. Just from your opinion, you have a podcast or a book or something like that you recommend for folks that listen to the show, just have different guests kind of share. Is there a book you've read that you think is valuable from a leadership standpoint or a ranch management standpoint? Anything that you'd advise, say, hey, go check this out?
You're going to make me look bad. I don't know if I have a specific one I look at, but I think things like the Ranching for Profit seminars and those kind of things and any of those kind of podcasts on grazing are good for people to listen to. And then sometimes I just listen to podcasts because they're entertaining. The other thing I listen to is we have Tiffany Lashmet, who's an economist here for us and an attorney, and she has a fantastic podcast. Ag Law, I think is the name of it. And that's the one I probably listen to the most just because she's got a great practical background in cattle management, plus she's an attorney, and property rights issues are always a big concern. Yeah, and we've had her on here. She's a great guest. So, well, Dr. Gill, good to visit with you here. I think a topic like this is relevant to today, but also just as folks begin to know as we go through these next few years, there's a lot of decisions you need to make. Not everyone's just going to be the same decision every year, but thinking through that process, what does it work? How does it pencil, as you had said as well before. So thank you for joining us here today on the program. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Dr. Ron Gill, professor and extension livestock specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, joining us here today on the program. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, meteorologist Don Day steps in as we take a look at that long-range weather, but kind of a twist to it. We're not really talking 7 to 10 days out as much as what's going on that's shaping our weather pattern as we look not really to the last major El Niño, which is 1997, because things aren't lining up to the same one as this one. We'd have to go back to the 1950s to match up to that. We'll talk more about it coming up next.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
Today's Long Range Weather brought to you by Long Range with Epinomectin, extended release dewormer with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose, helping your herd graze and gain weight without extra parasite pressure. Find out more by going to the website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, joining us now with a look at our long-range weather is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we look at our weather from a standpoint of the conversation piece that always continues to come up is, of course, looking at the El Niño that's out there. We know that it's there, when it's going to peak and all of that. But I thought it was interesting, in one of your shows last week in your podcast, you were talking about just really, really long-term and showing some graphs in return in the respect that while we're in an El Niño, it's not necessarily the same El Niño as 1997. There's some other factors that play into this, and it actually resembles more of a weather pattern dating back to the 1950s. So I want you to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. We all are hyper-focused on this El Niño for good reason. I mean, we hear about it all the time in the media, and a lot of people are talking about it. But when you look at the Pacific Ocean on the whole, there's other things that are going on, just not El Niño. And there's something that's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is like the El Niño, La Niña phenomenon, but instead of being on the equator, where the water's so warm and all that extra water vapor goes into the air during an El Niño cycle, We also have to pay attention to other parts of the Pacific, most notably the North Pacific. If you think of the Gulf of Alaska, the waters off the California and Pacific Northwest coast, going all the way back to Korea and Japan, that area is just as important, not necessarily in terms of what we see with the El Nino, but it sort of acts as a regulator. It can put the brakes on an El Nino if it's in one phase or another. And what we do with Pacific Decadal Oscillation is we give it a minus, a negative phase, or a positive phase. The negative phase is when the general trend of the North Pacific is overall cooler, and other waters in the Pacific are the same thing. And when we go into a positive phase, those waters tend to be warmer. And there's other parts of the Pacific that are part of this oscillation that we watch. When we go back and look at the most recent really strong El Nino, the two that we've had in recent memory, the El Nino of 97, 98, and the El Nino of 2015 and 16, what's interesting is that really strong El Nino of 97, 98 that a lot of people are comparing this current one to, the base state of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation was reverse of what we have now. Now, why is that important? Well, the positive phase of a Pacific Decadal Oscillation means the overall trend of the Pacific is warmer, not only on the equator, but in other locations. And if you put an El Nino on top of a Pacific Decadal Oscillation, that means the El Nino will behave differently. But this time around, with this really strong El Nino, we have the negative phase of the PDO. So when people start comparing this current El Nino to ones in the past, it's not really apples to apples. I say all the time that there are no two El Ninos that are exactly the same, and that's really true when you factor in these other factors like the PDO.
Yeah, and one of the things, as you showed a graph last week, I thought it was interesting because, as I said before, what we're looking at is it's more of a resemblance back into the 1950s. And I know there's several folks around that might remember the 1950s, but there's an awful lot that don't remember the 1950s.
That's right.
For one reason or the other.
Right. No, you're right. I'm starting to show my age, right? Remember when we start talking about the old days? Well, this is what's important. So these Pacific Decadal Oscillations will alternate between positive and negative phase on average about every 20 or 30 years. There's no set time limit, but that's historically when we've been able to reconstruct weather patterns to find that they last that long. When you're in a negative phase of the PDO, you tend to have a much more higher frequency of La Niñas. And the La Niñas tend to leave a good part of the western and central United States in dry periods. When you start to get more La Niñas, you tend to get droughty. So if you're in a negative phase of a PDO, it doesn't mean you don't have El Niños. We've got one right now, okay? But you tend to more frequently have these 20 or 30-year periods that are dominated either by La Niñas or El Niños. And you bring up the 50s, because the last time we saw this many La Niñas in a 30-year period was the late 1940s through the 50s and into the early 60s. Then what happened is that sometime in the mid to late 60s, all the way up to 1997, we saw the Pacific go to the positive phase, where you tend to get more El Niños and less La Niñas. And if you have less La Niñas, you have less drought in North America. So in 1997 and 1998, when we had the really strong El Nino, the following years, the Pacific flipped. It went from positive to negative, and generally speaking, while there's been a few exceptions, we've been in that negative phase since 1999, 98, and so we're on year 27 of being in a negative phase. And if you look at drought frequency in the West and central United States, you have a high number of droughts in the 50s and early 60s, a lesser amount of droughts late 60s to the late 90s, and we have a higher frequency of drought since then. Mm-hmm. And those match up very well with these Pacific Decadal Oscillations.
All right. So we won't answer that today because we want to leave something to talk about down the road. And I know we've also talked about doing a program where we look at our long-term weather, but are we at the tail end? That's kind of the question, isn't it?
That is a good question because, we're on year 26, 27, and historically they usually end around year 30. So that means we should be close in theory.
In theory. All right. Well, Don, great discussion, good information here this morning, and we look forward to catching up with you next time.
See you then.
All right. And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. You can tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast. You can find the link by going to his website at dayweather.com.
Imagine keeping your cattle exactly where you want them, while being able to tap into insights powered by a collar and an app. No Fence is the world's first virtual fencing system for grazing livestock. From the palm of your hand and delivered with GPS technology, you can set and move pasture boundaries, gain insight into grazing patterns, receive reduced animal activity alerts, and more. No wires, no posts, just empowered grazing that supports healthier land and your herd goals. 10,000 plus producers globally already trust No Fence. Explore the possibilities at nofence.com.
With rising feed costs and the increased focus on sustainability within the beef industry, feed efficiency is more than a buzzword. It's rapidly becoming a battle cry and an industry challenge to do more with less. By incorporating today's Limousine and Limflex genetics into your planned crossbreeding program, you can capitalize on the breed's inherent feed efficiency advantage while still banking the premiums paid for high-quality, high-yielding carcasses. That's 2 ways to profit instead of 1. Let Limousine and Limflex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
Well, here's what we're working on future editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. As I said at the beginning, we're hoping to have on next week. I've got them lined up. We just got to see if everything works out. But Trey Patterson of the Padlock Ranch and John Maddox of Maddox Cattle Company, a very good conversation with 2 guys that have a lot of knowledge in this industry when it comes to building a commercial cow. John Maddox has done it for years. Trey Patterson, part of the Padlock, something that they have developed in their own operation as well. How do you build a commercial cow that's going to be profitable for the long haul? Are we designing a cow just for this next year's calf, or are we designing a cow for the future of our ranching profitability? A great discussion that I think ties in with very similar to what we talked a little bit about today and kind of stems off of that a bit. But 2 guys that have had a lot of experience do that, and I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Also working with Trent Stewart from Superior Livestock. He's a rep out of the Oregon area, and a lot of Western cattle sold in that most recent one, the Video Royale sale for Superior Livestock. We're going to visit with him, kind of get a recap of how things fared on that sale. And if you've been following along with us here throughout the summer, earlier we talked on that Corn Belt Classic sale, and boy, what a bell ringer that was. And then Clint Berry joined us almost a month ago as we recapped that week in the Rockies. Things just a little bit weaker, a little bit slower tone in the market. Of course, we also hear of the Mexico border doing a slow opening, but things have really kind of subsided in that news factor. So we'll kind of get the results on how that sale ended up there out of Winnemucca for Superior on the Video Royale results. So be sure to join us on the upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hey, and finally, I want to mention this one more time. I know I mentioned it at the very beginning, but this year marks 20 years for Working Ranch Magazine. Yeah, it was 2006 when the first issue went to print. And I was talking with the captain, Tim O'Byrne, who's been with it through the entire process. He's been very fundamental and key to the success of this magazine. And he was saying that they're going to be doing several different features throughout these upcoming issues. So it's a good time to get a subscription started if you don't have it already by going to workingranchmag.com. You know what else started up in the last 20 years with Working Ranch Magazine? Yeah, this show, Working Ranch Radio Show, thanks to Tigger and the captain. They got things up and going early on, and then I took over in 2020. So a lot of great things that they're going to feature in these upcoming issues. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production, Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Thanks to the captain, Tim O'Byrne, executive producer of the show, and to Paige Mills, production assistant. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.